So back then, we were saying, why did the government increase the additional buyer stamp duty so much for the foreigners? The increase was horrendous. Hi everybody, today the topic that I'm going to be speaking about is actually born out of a conversation with a friend who was sharing with me that he was considering to buy a commercial or industrial property. Before I dive into it, I just got to say that whatever comments or recommendation is also based on my understanding of this individual and also background and understanding the kind of financial ability, at least a rough guide here. So he was telling me that he wishes to look at an industrial property or commercial property. He has an existing HDB flat which haven't met his MOP. So I was actually telling him, maybe hold your horses and do something about your residential property before you go into a commercial property. He was asking me why not commercial industrial property? So I told him, if you have a budget of above X amount, I think it's worth going into commercial industrial. Otherwise, it's better for you to stay on in the residential market. Of course, that is another topic altogether. So I started sharing with him about the Singapore exchange versus most of the major dollar. And I actually recently talked about this in my last video, which I will actually put it in the comment section. So those of you who have not watched it, you can watch it in the last video that I did. So I also refer him to this report that I'm going to show you. It was taken from Forbes. We talk about the top 10 strongest currency in 2024. So the first four, Kuwaiti, Bahraini, Omani and Jordanian, all these currencies are from the Middle Eastern countries. Number 5, British pounds, which I've already did a comparison in the last video. And we also have Gibraltar pounds. Gibraltar pounds is actually pegged against the British pound, at least from what I read. And then we have Cayman Island dollars. Cayman Islands, those of you who have actually heard of the terms BVI, which is actually British Virgin Islands, where a lot of people who are high net worth, they will want to put their money there because it is basically a tax haven. Cayman Islands is something like that. And number 8, it is a tie also with euros, which I did the comparison already. And number 10, it is actually the US dollar, which we have already done the comparison in the last video. If you look at the top 4, which are the Middle Eastern countries, these are countries that are generally rich in oil and gas production. I do not know what it would mean to the currency now that the world is trying to push for climate change and less reliance on oil produced. But as a layman, I would think that this country will have to reinvent themselves to boost up their economy and be less dependent on oil or gas export to be able to keep their economy on par with the rest of the world. So if you take all these 10 currencies that are listed here, do a comparison with Sing dollar, you only see that the Swiss franc has actually appreciated against that of the Sing dollar. The rest have actually depreciated. Then I also showed this report from Straits Times in 2023, last year, February 14. So it says a global minimum effective tax rate of 15% will be introduced for large Singapore-led national enterprises in 2025 amid a broader international move to ensure a more transparent tax environment. Singapore will also implement a domestic top-up tax that will raise large MNC groups' effective tax rate here to 15%. And then there is another report from DBS. It also talks about the global minimum tax. It says, as of 2021 October, 136 countries have agreed to support rules that would subject multinational enterprises to a global minimum 15% tax rate from 2023. Countries where MNCs are effectively taxed below the 15% minimum tax rate, losing their appeal as companies re-evaluate existing and future legal entity and business operational structures in view of this development. And then it further on, it says Singapore remains attractive as a business hub in Asia Pacific region due to its excellent infrastructure, skilled workforce, political stability, as well as geographical proximity to high-worth Asian markets. So when I was reading this article, which I then shared with my friend, which by the time of the conversation with the friend, I've already read all these articles. What would it mean for places like the Cayman Islands or the British Virgin Islands, where these are generally safe tax havens? Would they actually have to abide by the minimum tax rates? So I would think that in the national level, environment is a little bit like, you imagine you go to other countries, night market, you go to the first store, you make a bargain, they do not budge. You go to the second store, and then you go to the third and the fourth store. I think by then, when you go to the third and the fourth store, you would roughly know what is the base price already. And sometimes you realize that when you go to the third or the fourth store, you are ready to buy the product, or let's say it's a shirt, then you realize that that store doesn't actually have the size. Then the third store or the fourth store would then go to the first or the second store to get the right size and the right fit, and then you do the purchase. So then you started thinking, who is actually the boss of this store, or are they actually independent of each other, but they sort of take a co-broking fee, something like that, like our real estate market. So then I think that in international level, this sort of levels the playing field for all the countries, so that you prevent multinationals from moving from one place to another and avoid countries cutting the throats of each other. Generally, if that were to be implemented well, I think that Singapore would actually stand to gain. So back then, we were saying, why did the government increase the additional buyer's stamp duty so much for the foreigners from 30 to 60%? The increase was horrendous. If you refer back to the report that we touched on in the video, it spoke about Singapore receiving an inflow of 448 billion in 2021. And the report actually came in 2022, November. Actually, after that, I did not read of any report already that talks about how much we received in 2022 or subsequently 2023. And then after that, we heard about the money laundering case, which by now have expanded to close to 3 billion. But if you really look at the figure, 3 billion is just a fraction of what came in 2021, the 448 billion. And in 2022 and 2023, we do not know the figures. Only the ruling party will know. Ultimately, I think that when they have this increment, they already saw these kind of figures that were floating around. They already saw the possibility of the influx of money coming in. And we also have to bear in mind that even though we are a country, we are really just a city actually. In terms of geographic, how much money can we actually absorb and yet not overly inflate the living expenses of our people living here? I think if you start connecting the dots, looking at the information of the global minimum tax rate, which I think Singapore would hugely benefit, and if you look at the appreciation of Sing dollars versus the major currency, I think there is a lot of optimism for the residential property market in Singapore. And you also have to imagine that if you are an investor or you are the bosses, the shareholders of the MNC company, then you are thinking about where you want to allocate your funds, where you want to invest your money. Would Singapore not be a radar? So I think what the government did was hugely preventive, but that also means that they anticipated a very, very high level of interest from outside, to put the money in Singapore. Back to the conversation that I had with my friend. So I was saying that we are Singaporeans. We can buy without the additional buyer's stamp duty. So why not use our privilege? And then after that, decide what we want to do, at least for the first property. Okay, I hope this video helps you. If you guys have any other information pertaining to the topic that I share, please share with me as well. We are all here to learn. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a property agent, property consultant. Okay, till the next video, I see you. Bye-bye.